The morning Eleanor Whitfield turned 72, her son handed her a cardboard box and told her she had until sunset to be gone. The box was small, smaller than a breadbasket, the kind of thing that might hold winter scarves or half-used candles. It sat on the kitchen table where she had served 43 years of breakfasts, and Derek had placed it there the way a man places evidence at a trial. Carefully, deliberately, so there could be no mistake about what it meant. "Mom, I'm not going to argue with you about this again." He didn't look at her when he spoke. He looked at the refrigerator, at the calendar on the wall, at his own hands folded on the table. Anywhere but her face. "Ashley and the kids need the space. We talked about this. We talked about it 3 times. Eleanor wanted to say that they had never talked about it, that Ashley had announced it one Sunday over pot roast while Derek stared at his plate, and Eleanor had sat there with gravy cooling on her fork, understanding that a decision had been made somewhere she hadn't been invited. She wanted to say that this was her house, that Harold had paid it off with 30 years of early mornings at the foundry, that she had planted every rose bush in the yard with her own hands, that the kitchen tile Ashley hated was the tile Harold had laid himself the summer before the diagnosis, humming Johnny Cash while he worked. But Eleanor had learned something in 72 years. There were fights you could win and fights you couldn't, and you could tell the difference by looking at who was willing to meet your eyes. "What's in the box, Derek?" "Your things. The things we thought you'd want." He finally looked up, and his face was exactly what she had feared. Not cruel, not angry, just tired. Tired in the way that men get tired when their wives have been grinding at them for months about a mother-in-law who takes up a bedroom and asks questions at dinner and insists on planting vegetables in the yard like it's still 1962. Eleanor lifted the lid. Inside she found her mother's wedding ring, a silver one, worn thin around the band. Her reading glasses, a small photograph album, her Bible, the one her father had given her when she turned 16. And at the bottom, wrapped in an old kitchen towel that had been hers for longer than Derek had been alive, a tin box roughly the size of a shoebox. She knew what was inside without opening it. She had kept that tin for 58 years, ever since her grandmother had pressed it into her hands on a summer afternoon in Kentucky and told her, "These are for when you need them, Eleanor. You'll know when." Seeds. Hundreds of paper envelopes filled with seeds her grandmother had saved, that her great-grandmother had saved before that, going back to a farm in the Cumberland Valley that no longer existed except in the DNA of what was stored in that tin. Heritage tomatoes nobody grew anymore. Corn varieties that had been planted on the same ground for 120 years. Beans named after women who had died before the Civil War. A whole private library of living things, sleeping in paper envelopes, waiting. "Where are the rest of my things, Derek?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Ashley donated most of it. The furniture, the dishes, the Christmas decorations. She said you wouldn't have room wherever you ended up." "Wherever I ended up." "Mom, please. My wedding dress was in that cedar chest." "I didn't know that." "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Eleanor closed the box. She stood up slowly, the way she had learned to stand up slowly in the last few years, because her hip didn't forgive sudden movements the way it used to. She took the box in both arms. It weighed almost nothing. 72 years of a woman's life, and it weighed almost nothing. "Where am I supposed to go, Derek?" "I made some calls. There's a place in Pine Bluff. They have openings. I put you on the list. They said if you come in today, they can get you a room by the end of next week." "A room? It's nice, Mom. It's clean. They have activities." "Next week. What am I supposed to do until next week?" Derek's jaw worked. He pulled an envelope from his shirt pocket and slid it across the table. "There's $300 in there. It's all I could get from the account without Ashley seeing. That should cover a motel for a few nights." "I'm sorry. I wish it could be more." Eleanor looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up. "You wish it could be more. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." She had never hit a man in her life. She had raised her hand to Derek exactly twice when he was small, once when he ran into the street, and once when he hit his sister with a toy truck, and both times she had cried about it for days afterward. She was not a woman who hit people. She was a woman who had kept a clean house and gone to church and voted in every election and paid her taxes and raised 2 children and nursed her husband through 18 months of cancer that ate him down to 96 pounds before it was done. She took the envelope. She put it in her purse. She walked to the front door of the house where she had lived since 1981, and she did not look back at her son because she understood with a clarity she wished she did not have, that if she looked back she would never stop looking back, and there was no point now in looking back, because the house was already gone, and so was he. The bus to the Greyhound station took 40 minutes. Eleanor sat by the window with the box on her lap and watched the town she had lived in her whole adult life move past her like a movie playing for someone else. The feed store where Harold used to buy chicken grit. The diner where Derek had held his high school graduation party. The little Methodist church where she had played piano for the choir for 26 years until arthritis made it impossible. She watched all of it slide by, and she did not cry, because crying was a thing you did when there was somebody to hear you, and there wasn't anybody, and wouldn't be, for a long time. At the Greyhound station, she looked at the departure board. Pine Bluff was one direction. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the room Derek had described, the activities, the clean sheets. She thought about what it would be like to sit in a common room with other old women who had also been handed cardboard boxes by their children, and she thought about how they would nod at each other without speaking, because there wasn't anything to say that would make it better, and pretending there was would just make it worse. She looked at the other destinations: Louisville, Nashville, Asheville, and then, near the bottom, a name that made her chest hurt. Millbrook, Kentucky, the town nearest her grandmother's farm. The place she had not been to in 58 years, since the summer she had been 15 and her grandmother had given her the tin of seeds and told her she would know when she needed them. The ticket cost $64. Eleanor paid in cash. The woman behind the counter asked if she wanted a return ticket, and Eleanor said no. Then she sat on a bench under the fluorescent lights and waited for the bus, and she held the box against her chest like a child she was protecting, and she did not pray, exactly, but she thought about her grandmother's voice, the way it had sounded that last summer before the stroke took her. You'll know when, Eleanor. These things keep. They wait. That's what seeds do. They wait. The bus ride was 7 hours. Eleanor slept for some of it and watched the country roll past for the rest. Kentucky in early April was still cold and brown, but there were patches of green starting at the edges of the woods, the first hint of what was coming. When she got off the bus in Millbrook at 11 o'clock at night, the air smelled like wet dirt and possibility, and she stood on the sidewalk outside the shuttered Greyhound office for a long time, just breathing, because she had not smelled air like that since she was 15 years old. Millbrook was a town of about 2,000 people, and it had the worn-down look of every small town in America that had watched its young people leave, and its factories close, and its hardware store become a dollar store, and its dollar store become an empty window. Eleanor walked down Main Street, carrying her box. There was one motel, a place called the Cumberland, and that had probably been nice in 1972 and had been deteriorating ever since. A room was $38 a night. Eleanor paid for 3 nights. That left her with $186 and a small pile of coins. The room smelled like cigarettes, though the placard on the door said it was non-smoking. The bedspread had a cigarette burn in it. The television worked, but the remote was missing. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and opened her box. She took out each item one by one and laid it on the nightstand. Her mother's ring, her reading glasses, the photograph album, the Bible, the tin of seeds. She opened the tin. Inside, just as she remembered, were paper envelopes, each one labeled in her grandmother's careful handwriting. Brandywine tomato, Cherokee purple, hickory kincorn, Arkansas traveler, rattlesnake bean, bloody butcher, mortgage lifter, fish pepper, Jenny Lynn melon. Names like poetry, names that had been planted in the same ground for 100 years, names that most people had never heard and would never hear. Eleanor picked up one envelope at random. Mortgage lifter tomato. Her grandmother's handwriting said Millbrook, 1963. From Estelle. Saved every year. The paper was yellow with age, but when Eleanor opened the envelope and tipped a few seeds into her palm, they were still there. Small, dark, unbroken. Sleeping. She held them for a long time. Her hand shook a little, the way it did now when she was tired. These are for when you need them, Eleanor. You'll know when. Well, she knew when. She just didn't know how. In the morning, she walked into town with her purse and her eyes adjusting to the daylight. Millbrook was smaller than she remembered. Most of the shops on Main Street were closed. The diner was still there, a place called Sue's that had been open since before Eleanor was born, and she went inside and ordered coffee and a biscuit because it was the cheapest thing on the menu. The waitress was a woman in her 50s with a tired face and kind eyes. Her name tag said Marlene. She poured the coffee and said, "You're not from around here." "I used to be. A long time ago. My grandmother had a farm outside town." Estelle Whitfield. Marlene paused with the coffee pot in her hand. Estelle Whitfield. Lord, I remember her. My mama used to buy tomatoes from her at the market when I was little. She had tomatoes like nobody else. You could smell them from across the parking lot. Eleanor's eyes filled. She looked down at her coffee cup. She was my grandmother. Well, I'll be. Marlene set down the pot. What brings you back? I'm not entirely sure. Eleanor tried to smile. I suppose I had nowhere else to go. Marlene looked at her for a moment, and Eleanor could feel herself being assessed, the way women assess each other when they are both old enough to have been through things. Then Marlene said, "Honey, you eat that biscuit, and you come back for lunch. Soup's on me today. You look like you could use some soup." Eleanor tried to say no, but she didn't have the strength for pride. She nodded. "Thank you. What's your name, honey?" "Eleanor." "Eleanor. Well, welcome home, Eleanor." The words cracked something open inside her that she had been holding shut since the previous morning. She managed not to cry until Marlene had walked away, and then she just sat there and let the tears fall into her coffee for a while, and no one in the diner said anything, because in small towns people know when to leave a woman alone and when to step in, and right then was a leave alone kind of moment. After breakfast, Eleanor walked. She walked out of town on the old county road that led north, past the tractor supply and the abandoned feed mill and the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She kept walking. Her hip hurt. She did not care. The road was quiet and the sky was the gray blue of an early April morning, and she walked for almost an hour before she saw the turnoff she was looking for. A dirt road. A rusted mailbox with no name on it. Beyond it, through a stand of scrub pine, she could see the roof line of a house. Her grandmother's farm. Eleanor stood at the end of the dirt road and looked. The house was still standing, but only barely. The porch had collapsed on one side. Most of the windows were broken. The barn was gone. Only the stone foundation remaining, like the bones of an animal picked clean. The fields, which she remembered as rows of corn and tomatoes and squash that had stretched all the way to the tree line, were grown up in brambles and young trees. 58 years of nothing. 58 years of the land forgetting what it used to be. But there was something about it still. The shape of the land. The way it sloped down toward the creek she could hear but not see. The particular way the morning light was falling across the east pasture, where her grandmother had kept 3 milk cows, and where Eleanor had learned to milk at the age of 7. It was still here. The land was still here, underneath the brambles and the broken windows and the 58 years of absence. It was still here, the way seeds are still there inside a paper envelope, waiting. Eleanor walked down the dirt road. Her hip was screaming now, but she kept going. When she reached the porch, she stood and looked at the house for a long time. Then she walked around to the back, where her grandmother had kept the kitchen garden, and she knelt down in the dead grass and put her hand flat on the ground. The soil was cold. It was April in Kentucky, and the soil was cold and dormant and waiting. Eleanor pressed her palm into it and felt something move inside her chest that was not heartbreak and was not grief and was not anger, but was something else, something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. Purpose. She felt purpose. She walked back to town that afternoon. At the county courthouse, she asked about the old Whitfield property, and a woman in records pulled up the file and told her the land had gone into tax delinquency in 1978, had been bought by the county, had been auctioned off twice to speculators who had never done anything with it, and had finally reverted back to county ownership about 12 years ago. 73 acres, the woman said. Assessed value $4,200. Nobody wanted it. It was too far from any town. The house was uninhabitable, and the soil tests had come back showing high clay content that made it difficult to farm by modern standards. How much to buy it? Eleanor asked. The woman laughed, not unkindly. Ma'am, the county would probably pay you to take it. Last time they put it up, the minimum bid was $100 and nobody showed up. If I wanted to bid on it now, Eleanor said, what would I need to do? The woman stopped laughing. She looked at Eleanor more carefully. Are you serious? I'm serious. You need to fill out a form and come to the next auction, which is, she tapped at her computer, 3 weeks from Friday, here at the courthouse, 10 in the morning. And the minimum bid, $100. Eleanor nodded slowly. She had $148 left after the motel. A $100 bid would leave her with $48. It would leave her with nothing. It would leave her with a collapsing house on 73 acres of untended land in a town where she knew no one. With no plan, no vehicle, no electricity, no running water, and no way to get any of those things. "I'll take the form," she said. She walked back to Sue's diner for lunch. Marlene brought her a bowl of chicken and dumplings and sat down across from her while the lunch rush thinned out. Marlene said, "You look like you got something on your mind, Eleanor." Eleanor told her, "Not all of it, but enough. About Derek. About the box. About the bus ticket. About the farm. About the auction." She heard herself talking and she could hardly believe she was saying it, because it sounded, even to her, like the kind of plan a crazy woman makes. The kind of thing a woman thinks up when she has lost her mind entirely and is about to walk into traffic. When she was done, Marlene was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Eleanor, honey, you know that property has been sitting empty for 50 years. You know the house isn't livable. I know. You don't have a car. You don't have any money. You don't know anybody here anymore. I know. Then why on God's green earth are you thinking about bidding on that farm?" Eleanor looked down at her soup. She thought about how to answer. She thought about the tin of seeds in her motel room. She thought about her grandmother's voice. She thought about the feel of cold soil under her palm that morning. She thought about Derek saying, "Wherever you ended up." She thought about all the places she could end up, all the rooms and all the Pine Bluff facilities where old women waited out the end, and she thought about what it would mean to die in a room like that versus to die on the land where her grandmother had taught her how to plant. "Because I've got seeds," she said finally. "I've got my grandmother's seeds, and they've been waiting 58 years. And I figure if they can wait that long, I can too." Marlene looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on Eleanor's hand. "All right, Eleanor. All right. Let's see what we can do." That afternoon, Marlene drove Eleanor back out to the farm in an old pickup truck that smelled like French fries and dogs. Marlene walked the property with her, poked around the house, looked in the windows, stood in the middle of what had been the main field, and turned in a slow circle. "The house is a tear down," Marlene said. "I won't lie to you. But the land. Eleanor, this land is beautiful. Look at that slope. Look at that creek. You've got southern exposure on the big field. You've got old-growth shade trees along the drive. This land is beautiful, Eleanor. It's been abandoned for 50 years. Land doesn't care about 50 years. Land waits." Eleanor looked at her. "That's what my grandmother used to say. Then she was a smart woman." Marlene kicked at a clod of earth with her boot. The soil came up dark and crumbly beneath the surface layer. "And this dirt. People will tell you this dirt is no good. Too much clay. Won't grow modern crops. But you know what this dirt will grow, Eleanor?" "What?" "Whatever was growing here before people started saying what dirt could and couldn't grow." Eleanor smiled for the first time in days. It felt strange on her face, like a muscle she had forgotten how to use. "You believe that?" "I believe people in this town have been eating the same sad tomatoes from the supermarket for 30 years, and anybody who grew a real one and put it in front of them would make a killing." Marlene put her hands on her hips and looked at the field. "You got anywhere to stay, Eleanor?" "I've got 3 nights at the Cumberland." "The Cumberland is a dump." "I know. I've got a couch." Eleanor started to protest, and Marlene held up her hand. "I'm not asking. My husband died 8 years ago, and my kids are in Louisville, and I live by myself in a house that's too big for one person. You take the couch. You help me in the garden out back. You teach me what you know about tomatoes. And when the auction comes, we'll figure out the bid." "All right." Eleanor could not speak. She nodded. "All right," Marlene said. "Let's get your box out of the Cumberland. That place is a dump, and you shouldn't be there another night." That evening, Eleanor sat at Marlene's kitchen table and opened the tin of seeds for only the second time in 58 years. She spread the envelopes across the table in the warm yellow light of a single overhead bulb, and Marlene read the names out loud, one by one, like she was reading a eulogy or maybe a christening. Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, Radiator Charlie's Mortgage Lifter. "Eleanor, this is Mortgage Lifter. Do you know what this is?" "It's a tomato. It's the tomato. A man named M.C. Biles bred it in West Virginia in the 1930s and sold plants for $1 apiece and paid off his $6,000 mortgage in 6 years. They're nearly extinct now. You can't find them commercially. Eleanor, this is not just a tomato. My grandmother saved the seeds every year. Her whole life. Your grandmother was a seed saver. Eleanor, do you know what your grandmother was? She was a farmer. She was a treasure. She was a walking library. These varieties. Marlene picked up envelope after envelope. Hickory King, Bloody Butcher, Fish Pepper. Eleanor, do you know what heritage seeds are worth now? Do you know that there are seed companies that pay $10 a seed for rare heritage varieties? Do you know there are farmers markets in Louisville where heirloom tomatoes sell for $8 a pound? Eleanor shook her head. She had not known any of that. She had known only that her grandmother had given her the tin and told her to keep them, and she had kept them, through a marriage and 2 children and a widowhood and a banishment, through every move and every hardship, because her grandmother had told her to, and you did not throw away a thing your grandmother told you to keep. Marlene set down the envelope in her hand. Eleanor, I think you need to tell me exactly how many seeds are in this tin. They counted. It took 3 hours. They counted every envelope and every seed in every envelope, and when they were done, Marlene sat back in her chair and rubbed her face with both hands. 47 varieties, she said. Some of them I've never even heard of. And Eleanor, this Jenny Lynn melon. I don't think there are 50 viable Jenny Lynn seeds left in the world outside the USDA seed bank. You've got 38 of them. Is that a lot? Eleanor, you could actually do this. You could actually grow these. And people would pay. Eleanor, people would pay. Eleanor looked at the seeds spread across the table. 47 paper envelopes. A lifetime of her grandmother's careful saving. She thought about Derek, 300 miles away, sitting at the kitchen table in the house that was no longer hers. She thought about the envelope with the $300 in it. She thought about the box she had carried on her lap through 7 hours of bus ride, and how small it had seemed, how she had felt, carrying it, like she was carrying nothing. Marlene, she said, I think I'm going to bid on that farm. I think you are too, Marlene said. The 3 weeks before the auction passed in a blur of small mercies. Marlene introduced Eleanor to people at the diner and at the Methodist church and at the feed store, and word got around the way word gets around in small towns, that Estelle Whitfield's granddaughter had come home and was thinking of reclaiming the old place, and most people thought she was crazy, but a few of them, the older ones, the ones who remembered Estelle, looked at Eleanor with something like recognition, and one of them, a man named Cyrus who had to be 85 years old and who still drove his own truck, took her aside one morning at the diner and said, Your grandmother helped my wife through a bad winter in '61. Brought us food when we didn't have any. I never forgot that. You need anything, you come tell me. Marlene taught her the basics of what had changed in farming since she was 15. Drip irrigation, raised beds, the farmer's market system, online sales, social media, which Eleanor did not understand and did not pretend to understand, but trusted that Marlene did. They planned. They calculated. They made lists. Eleanor learned that there was a farmer's market in Louisville every Saturday where a vendor could rent a stall for $40 and sell directly to customers who would pay premium prices for heirloom produce. She learned that there were restaurants in Louisville and Lexington and Nashville that paid chefs to find local, heritage ingredients. She learned that what her grandmother had been doing, what her grandmother had always been doing, had a name now. It was called seed sovereignty. It was called heirloom preservation. It was called a movement. Your grandmother was ahead of her time by about 60 years, Marlene said one night. My grandmother was just a farmer, Eleanor said. Eleanor, a farmer who saved 47 varieties of rare heritage seeds for her whole adult life, who gave them to her granddaughter and told her to keep them until she needed them, was not just a farmer. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. She knew these seeds would matter someday. She just didn't know when. Eleanor thought about that for a long time. She thought about her grandmother's face the afternoon she had given her the tin, the particular seriousness of it, the way her grandmother had held both of Eleanor's hands in hers and said, You'll know when, Eleanor. These things keep. They wait. She had thought at the time that her grandmother was just being old-fashioned, just being sentimental. She had not understood that her grandmother was passing her a torch, that her grandmother had chosen her, out of all the family, out of all the cousins and the nieces and the daughters, because her grandmother had looked at her at 15 and seen something she trusted. Eleanor did not cry often. She had done most of her crying in a single evening, on the bus from her old life to this one. But she cried that night at Marlene's kitchen table, thinking about her grandmother, understanding something across the distance of 58 years that she could not have understood at the time. The day of the auction, Eleanor wore the best dress she had, which was a blue cotton thing Marlene had bought her at a yard sale for $2, because Ashley had donated everything else. Marlene drove her to the courthouse. There were 7 other people there for the auction, all of them men, most of them developers or land speculators, all of them with the particular confident posture of people who were used to buying things. The county auctioneer read through the properties one by one. Eleanor sat in the back with Marlene and waited. Most of the properties sold quickly. Condemned houses, commercial lots, parcels along the highway. When the auctioneer got to the Whitfield property, there was a small murmur in the room. One of the men, a big man in a canvas jacket with a Cummins diesel cap on, turned to the man next to him and said, loud enough for Eleanor to hear, "That dirt farm? Who's going to bid on that?" The other man laughed. "Somebody who doesn't know any better." The auctioneer began. 73 acres, rural parcel, unincorporated Millbrook County. Structure on premises is non-habitable. Minimum bid $100. Do I hear 100? Eleanor raised her hand. The room went quiet. Every head turned. The auctioneer paused. I have 100. Do I hear 150? The big man in the Cummins cap was staring at Eleanor. He was a man in his early 50s, heavy-set, with a face that had the peculiar redness of someone who spent a lot of time angry and a lot of time drinking. He turned to his friend and said, still loud enough for Eleanor to hear, "You gotta be kidding me. Look at her. That old lady can't farm that land. She couldn't farm a flower pot." The friend laughed. A few other men laughed. Eleanor did not move. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the auctioneer. 100, going once, said the auctioneer. Wait a minute, said the big man. He stood up. I'll bid 200. Eleanor's heart dropped. She had $148. She had planned for 100. She did not have 200. Marlene, next to her, whispered, Eleanor, that's Jimmy Holleran. He owns the feed store and a bunch of land around the county. He's a bastard. He doesn't want the land. He's messing with you. Eleanor looked at Jimmy Holleran. He was grinning at her. He wanted her to see him grinning. He wanted her to understand that he was a man who could do this, who could spend $200 on a piece of land. He didn't want just to watch an old woman fail. The auctioneer looked at Eleanor. 200. Do I hear 250? Eleanor did not know what she was going to do. She was going to have to let it go. She was going to have to stand up and walk out of this room and get back on a bus to somewhere, because there was no somewhere left, and she was going to have to accept that this man, this grinning stranger, had decided on a whim to end a thing that she had only just barely allowed herself to begin. Marlene stood up. 250, Marlene said. Jimmy Holleran turned to look at Marlene. His grin got bigger. Oh, Marlene, you too? You gonna throw your money away on that dump? I'm gonna outbid you, Jimmy, Marlene said. Because I don't like you. The auctioneer said, I have 250. Do I hear 300? 300, Jimmy said. Marlene sat down. She leaned over to Eleanor and whispered, I've got $800 in my checking account. I can go to 6. After that, you're on your own. Marlene, I can't let you. You can pay me back out of the first tomato crop, Eleanor. Hush. Marlene stood up again. 350. Jimmy's grin flickered. He looked at Marlene and then at Eleanor, and Eleanor could see him calculating. He didn't actually want the land. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted to humiliate an old woman he didn't know for a reason he probably couldn't have articulated, beyond the fact that he had been humiliating people for years and nobody had stopped him. 400, he said. 450, said Marlene. 500. 550. 600. Marlene hesitated. Eleanor could see her doing the math. 600 was her limit. Marlene opened her mouth to say 650, and Eleanor reached up and took her hand. It's all right, Marlene, Eleanor whispered. Let him have it. Eleanor, let him have it. He doesn't want it. He'll let it sit, and nothing will happen to it. I'll find another way. The auctioneer said, 600 going once. An old man stood up in the third row. Eleanor hadn't noticed him before. He was thin and stooped, and wearing a feed cap that said Pioneer Seeds on it in letters that had faded almost to white. He was at least 80. 700, the old man said. The whole room turned to look at him. Cyrus, the man who had told her, at the diner, that her grandmother had helped his wife through a bad winter in 1961. Jimmy Holleran's face went a different color. Cyrus, what the hell are you doing? I'm bidding on a piece of land, Jimmy. That's what you do at an auction. You don't need that land. I didn't say I needed it. I said I was bidding on it. Jimmy looked around the room. He was losing control of the thing. He had started it as a joke, and it had become something else, and he wasn't sure yet whether he could still win. $750, he said. Cyrus said, $800. $850, Jimmy said. $900, Cyrus said. Jimmy looked at his friend next to him. The friend looked away. Jimmy's face was the color of a brick. $1,000, Jimmy said. Cyrus sat very still. He folded his hands in his lap. Then he said, in a perfectly calm voice, $1,100. Jimmy Holleran stood up. What the hell is going on here? This is bullshit. This is a setup. Is this a setup? The auctioneer said, Sir, please sit down or leave the room. This is a setup. They're running me up. Cyrus said, mildly, Jimmy, you want the land or not? Jimmy stared at him, then at Eleanor, then at Marlene. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He sat down. 1,100, going once, said the auctioneer. 1,100, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the third row for $1,100. Jimmy Holleran stood up again and walked out of the room. He slammed the door behind him hard enough that a picture fell off the wall. After the auction, in the hallway of the courthouse, Cyrus walked up to Eleanor and handed her the deed. He had paid in cash. $1,100 in cash, from a wallet he pulled out of his back pocket like it was nothing, like he carried $1,100 in cash all the time, which, Eleanor would later learn, he did. This belongs to you, Eleanor, Cyrus said. Cyrus, I can't. I don't have the money to pay you back. I don't have anything. Your grandmother gave me and my wife food for 6 weeks in the winter of '61 when my wife was pregnant with our third, and I couldn't find work. I never paid her back. This is me paying her back. You don't owe me anything, Eleanor. Not a dime. Eleanor looked at the deed in her hand. 73 acres. Her name on it. Her name, not Derek's, not Harold's, not anyone's, but hers. She started to cry. Cyrus patted her shoulder awkwardly. Now, none of that. Your grandmother wouldn't want you crying. She'd want you getting to work. Planting season's coming. You got about 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Eleanor said. She looked at Marlene. She looked at Cyrus. She looked at the deed. 73 acres of abandoned land and a tin of seeds and 2 friends she had not had a month ago. 3 weeks, she said again, and this time it did not sound impossible. It sounded like a start. They drove out to the farm that afternoon, the 3 of them, in Cyrus's old Ford pickup. Cyrus stood at the edge of the big field with his hands on his hips and looked at the tangled mess of brambles and volunteer scrub pine and dead grass that had overtaken what had been, 50 years ago, one of the most productive small farms in the county. Your grandmother's field, he said, more to himself than to Eleanor. I haven't stood here in 40 years. You knew her well? Everybody knew Estelle. My wife used to say Estelle Whitfield could grow a tomato on a concrete slab if you gave her enough manure and a good word. Cyrus smiled. It was the first time Eleanor had seen him smile. She was a hell of a woman, your grandmother. Stubborn as a mule and twice as smart. You favor her, you know, around the eyes. Nobody ever told me that. Well, somebody should have. Cyrus walked the field slowly. He pointed out where the old irrigation ditches had been, where the compost pile had stood, where Estelle had kept her chickens, where the outhouse had been before they ran the septic line in the 50s. He knew the farm the way you know a thing you have loved and watched disappear, and Eleanor understood that this land was not only hers. It belonged, in some quieter way, to the whole handful of people who still remembered what it had been. First thing you need to do, Cyrus said, is clear the big field. That's your cash crop ground. Southern exposure, good drainage. The soil under those brambles hasn't been tilled in 50 years, which is actually a blessing. No herbicide buildup. No pesticide residue. You plow it this spring, and you'll be planting into dirt that hasn't been abused since before I graduated from high school. How do I clear it? Well, that's the question. Eleanor looked at the field. It was maybe 4 acres, she guessed. 4 acres of brambles and scrub. She was 72 years old. She had $148. She had a tin of seeds and a Bible and her mother's ring. I don't know how, she said. Cyrus nodded like he had expected that answer. No, I didn't figure you would. Well, I've got a tractor. I've got a brush hog. I've got a disc harrow. I've got time, which is the only thing I've got a lot of these days. What I don't have is the strength to do it all by myself anymore, and my grandsons are useless. My grandsons. He shook his head. 2 of them live in Cincinnati and work in offices. One of them is a computer programmer, whatever that means. None of them know a thing about the land. None of them care to. Eleanor understood. She had a grandson too. Derek's son, Tyler, who was 15 and who had not spoken more than a sentence to her in 3 years. Tyler, who spent his whole life staring at a screen and who had once, when she asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, looked at her like she had asked him a question in a language he did not speak. My grandson is the same way, Eleanor said. They all are. It's not their fault. It's what the world made them. But it means there's nobody left who knows how to do this work, Eleanor. Nobody your age, nobody my age, and nobody coming up. We're the last ones. You and me and Marlene and the handful of old fools who still remember how to grow a tomato from seed. He looked at her. So when I ask you, how bad do you want this? I'm not asking to be rude. I'm asking because it matters. It matters whether this field comes back or doesn't. It matters more than you might think. Eleanor thought about it. She thought about Derek and the box and the $300 and the bus ride. She thought about her grandmother pressing the tin into her hands. She thought about the soil she had felt under her palm on the first morning she came back. I want it, she said. I want it as bad as I've ever wanted anything. Cyrus nodded. All right then. I'll bring the tractor out tomorrow. We'll start on the big field. You got seeds? 47 varieties. 47. He whistled low. Your grandmother's seeds? Yes. Jesus wept. Eleanor, that's you know what you've got there, don't you? I'm starting to. No, you don't. Not yet. But you will. He put his hands back on his hips and looked out over the tangled field one more time, and Eleanor watched him and understood that he was seeing something she could not see yet. Something that was not yet there, but would be. You will, Eleanor. I promise you. You will. That night, back at Marlene's house, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay on the couch in Marlene's living room and stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate what she had taken on. She had 73 acres of land. She had $1,100 of a stranger's money riding on her ability to do something with it. She had 47 varieties of heirloom seeds, most of which had not been planted in half a century, which meant she did not know what percentage of them would even germinate. She had no tools, no water source in the house, no electricity, no vehicle, and no plan beyond what 3 old people had sketched on a napkin at the diner that afternoon. She got up and sat at Marlene's kitchen table and opened the tin of seeds again. She took out the envelopes one by one and laid them out in front of her. Mortgage lifter, Cherokee purple, Brandywine, Bloody Butcher, Jenny Lind. She thought about her grandmother at 15, which was as old as Eleanor had been when her grandmother gave her the tin. Her grandmother, born in 1898, raised on that same Kentucky dirt, married at 16 to a man who died in 1942 in a tractor accident, widowed young and left with 4 children and 73 acres and no money. And her grandmother had kept it going. Through the Depression, through 2 world wars, through the death of a husband and the illness of a child, and the long, slow decline of every small farm around her. Her grandmother had kept it going, and more than that, she had kept these seeds going, year after year, choosing the best tomato each summer and saving its seeds, choosing the sweetest melon and saving its seeds, building over a lifetime this tiny private library of plants that could not be bought from any catalog and could not be replaced if lost. Eleanor held an envelope of Brandywine seeds in her hand. Her grandmother's handwriting was on it. Millbrook, 1961. From the West Row. Goodyear. She thought. My grandmother kept these going for 100 years. I can keep them going one more season. She slept a little after that. In the morning, Cyrus's truck was in Marlene's driveway before sunrise, and the work began. The next 3 weeks were the hardest physical labor Eleanor had done in her life. Cyrus brought the tractor and the brush hog, and they cleared the big field over 2 long days, knocking down the brambles and the young trees, exposing the ground underneath, which was, as Cyrus had predicted, dark and rich and dormant. He ran the disc harrow across it and turned up soil that had not been turned in 5 decades. It came up in heavy chunks, clayey and cold, but it came up. Eleanor walked behind him with a bucket, picking up stones and pieces of old glass and nails, and the occasional piece of rusted tool. A horseshoe, a bent spoon, a small metal toy soldier that must have belonged to one of her uncles 70 years ago. By the end of the first week, the field was turned over, and the old farmhouse was at least partially cleaned. Marlene and two of her church friends came out on Saturday and helped Eleanor shovel 50 years of mouse droppings and leaves and collapsed plaster out of what had been the kitchen. They boarded up the windows with plywood Cyrus donated from his own barn. They could not make the house livable in 3 weeks, but they could make it dry, and they could make it weathertight, and they could rig up an old camp stove in what had been the kitchen so Eleanor could boil water for coffee and heat soup. Cyrus installed a hand pump over the old well, which, miraculously, still worked after 50 years, the water coming up cold and clear and tasting of minerals and the deep dark places where water lives inside the ground. Eleanor moved out of Marlene's house and into the farmhouse on the 15th of April. Marlene objected. Cyrus objected. Half of Millbrook objected, the half that knew about it, which was more people than Eleanor would have expected. But Eleanor was firm. She was 72 years old, and she had been living in other people's houses for 43 years, and she had just bought a piece of land, and she was going to sleep on it. She was going to sleep on her own land. That was not negotiable. The first night in the farmhouse, she laid her sleeping bag out on an old iron bed frame that Cyrus had hauled up from his barn. He had given her 3 quilts his wife had made before she died, and Eleanor piled them on top of the sleeping bag and crawled inside and listened to the house, which made all kinds of sounds she had not heard in a long time. Mice in the walls, wind in the eaves, the slow settling of old wood, the distant sound of coyotes, which made her sit up, alarmed, until she remembered that she was in the country, that coyotes were part of the country, that she had grown up hearing coyotes and had only forgotten what they sounded like. She prayed, that first night, for the first time in a long time. Not the rote prayers she had said her whole life in the Methodist church. Something different. Something that sounded more like a conversation. She thanked her grandmother. She thanked Cyrus and Marlene. She did not thank Derek, because she was not yet ready to thank Derek, though she thought, obscurely, that she might someday. She asked for strength. She asked for time. She asked, specifically and concretely, that at least some of the seeds in the tin would still be viable, because if none of them germinated, she did not know what she was going to do. In the morning, she walked out to the field with the tin of seeds. The soil was still cold. April in Kentucky was still a gamble. But the sun was coming up clean and clear behind the stand of trees at the east edge of the property, and the field was waiting. And Eleanor knelt down with a hand trowel Cyrus had lent her and planted her first seed into the ground of her grandmother's farm. A single mortgage lifter tomato seed. She pressed it into the dirt with her thumb. She covered it with soil. She watered it with a tin cup of water from the well. She stood up. She looked at the spot where the seed was buried. She could not see it, of course. It was below the surface, in the cold dark where it needed to be. "All right, Grandma," she said out loud, because there was no one to hear her, and it did not matter anymore whether she sounded foolish. I'm starting right now." By the end of April, she had planted over 3,000 seeds in careful rows across the big field. She had planted them the way her grandmother had taught her, 60 years ago, in hills and rows, with string lines to keep the rows straight and little stakes at the end of each row labeling what was planted there. Cherokee purple in the north section, mortgage lifter in the middle, brandywine and rattlesnake bean along the west edge, hickory king corn in the low area near the creek where the moisture was best, Jenny Lynn melons and bloody butcher and fish peppers and every other variety her grandmother had saved, each in its own careful patch, each one marked and recorded in a notebook Marlene had given her. The weather was kind. The rains came when they needed to, and the late frost stayed away. And on a morning in the second week of May, Eleanor walked out to the big field and saw the first green shoots pushing up through the dark soil, and she stood there and cried for the second time since she had come back, because her grandmother's seeds that had slept for 58 years in a paper envelope in a tin box in a cardboard box in a closet in Ohio, were waking up. They were waking up. They were coming back. She walked the rows, counting. The germination rate was high, higher than she had dared hope. The mortgage lifter was coming up thick and strong. The brandywine was slower but steady. The corn was just barely showing. The beans were climbing already. Some varieties had not come up yet, and she did not know if they would. And she made herself accept that some of them might be lost, might have waited too long, might have crossed the line between dormancy and death at some point during those 58 years. But most of them were coming. Most of her grandmother's seeds were alive. That afternoon, Jimmy Holleran's truck pulled into her driveway. Eleanor was on the porch drinking coffee from a tin cup. She watched the truck come up the dirt road and stop in front of the house. Jimmy got out. He was alone. He stood next to his truck for a long moment, looking at the field, looking at the house, looking at her. Then he walked up to the porch. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Holleran, I came to tell you something." "All right." He took off his cap. He held it in both hands. He was not smiling now. He looked like a man who had come to do a thing he did not want to do. "I came to tell you I was wrong to do what I did at the auction. I came to apologize." Eleanor looked at him. She did not say anything. "I had been drinking. It's not an excuse. I had been drinking at Murphy's before I came over to the courthouse, and I thought it would be funny to I thought it would be funny. It wasn't. I'm sorry." "All right. That's all. That's all I came to say." He turned to go. "Mr. Holleran." He turned back. "Why did you think it would be funny?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at his boots. "I don't know. I guess I looked at you, and I thought, you look like somebody who needed things. And I don't know what it is about that makes a certain kind of man want to kick. But it does. And I'm that kind of man, apparently. And I'm trying not to be." He looked up. His eyes were wet. Eleanor was surprised to see it. "My mother died last year. She was 81. She lived alone. I didn't visit much. I keep thinking about that. And then I saw you at the auction, and you looked a little like her. And instead of doing what I should have done, I did what I did. I'm sorry." Eleanor considered this. Then she said, "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Holleran?" He blinked. "Ma'am, I asked if you would like some coffee. I have it in a pot on the camp stove inside. It's not very good, but it's hot." Jimmy Holleran looked at her like she had said something in a language he did not understand. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I would." She poured him a cup of coffee in another tin cup. They sat on the porch and drank it. They did not talk much. After a while, Jimmy Holleran said, "This is a lot of land to work by yourself. I have help. I heard Cyrus helped you clear it." "He did. Cyrus is a good man." "He is." Another long pause. Then, "I own a nursery supply business down by the highway, 30 miles south. We sell to landscape companies, mostly. We carry potting soil, mulch, compost, drip irrigation line." He paused. "I got pallets of stuff that doesn't move. Last year's drip line. Compost that's starting to be more than a year old. I could bring some of it up, if you needed it." Eleanor looked at him. She was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Holleran," she said finally, "I would be grateful." He nodded. He finished his coffee. He stood up. He put his cap back on. "I'll come by this weekend," he said. "All right." He walked to his truck. He got in. He started the engine. Then he rolled down the window and looked at her. "My mother used to grow tomatoes," he said. "When I was a boy. She grew these big pink ones she called mortgage lifters. She said they were the best tomatoes in the world." Eleanor smiled. She was right. "I know she was," he said. "I know." Then he drove away, and Eleanor sat on the porch for a long time after the dust of his truck had settled, thinking about what it meant that he had come. Thinking about what it meant that her grandmother's tomatoes had been growing in the memories of a man like that all these years. Thinking about how the seeds in her tin had not only been seeds. They had been something else. They had been a kind of witness, a kind of testimony, that what you plant grows into more than you can see, and keeps growing, in places you will never know about, for longer than any one person can measure. The sun was setting behind the treeline when Marlene's truck pulled up. Marlene got out with 2 bags of groceries and a thermos of hot soup. "I brought you dinner," Marlene said. "Marlene, you've got to stop. I can take care of myself." "Oh, hush. I didn't drive 30 minutes to be told to hush." Marlene came up on the porch. She looked at the 2 empty tin cups. "Who was here?" "Jimmy Holleran." Marlene's eyebrows went up. Jimmy Holleran was here. He came to apologize. Jimmy Holleran came to apologize. "Yes. Well, I'll be damned." Marlene sat down on the porch step. "The world is a stranger place than I give it credit for. He's bringing drip line this weekend. And compost." "Jimmy Holleran is bringing drip line and compost." "Yes." Marlene shook her head slowly. She opened the thermos and poured soup into one of the tin cups. "Eleanor, I want to tell you something." All right. When you came into the diner that first morning, when you told me who your grandmother was, I felt something, Eleanor. I don't usually talk like this. I'm not a superstitious person, but I felt something. I felt like I had been waiting for you to walk in that door and didn't know it. Eleanor looked at her. The last light of the day was on Marlene's face, and she looked younger than she was, and tired, and full of something that looked a little like hope. I felt the same thing, Eleanor said. This town has been dying, Eleanor. Dying for 20 years. People giving up. Stores closing. The young ones leaving and not coming back. And I was giving up too. I was starting to think maybe it was just time to let the place go. Marlene looked out at the field, at the dark rows where the first green was showing. And then you came in, with your cardboard box, and your grandmother's seeds. And you planted a field. Eleanor, you planted a field. I planted a field. You planted a field, Marlene said. And I want you to know that I don't think it's just a field. I think it's something else. I think you don't even know yet what it is. Eleanor thought about that. She thought about Jimmy Holleran's face when he had talked about his mother's tomatoes. She thought about Cyrus's hands on the tractor. She thought about the phone call she would eventually have to make to Derek, someday, when she was ready, to tell him where she was and what she was doing. She thought about all the things she did not yet know how to do and all the things she was going to have to learn. And then she thought about the seeds in the ground. 3,000 seeds. Green shoots coming up. Tomatoes that would ripen in August. Corn that would tassel in July. Melons that would swell in September. Food that would feed people. Food that would remind them of things they had forgotten. Food that would taste the way food had tasted when they were children and make them weep, some of them, without knowing why. Marlene, she said, I think you might be right. They sat on the porch and ate the soup and watched the field go dark. Somewhere out in the woods a coyote called. Another answered. The stars came out slowly over the Kentucky hills, the way stars come out in places where there are no city lights to wash them away, thick and close and old beyond measuring. Eleanor Whitfield sat on the porch of her grandmother's farmhouse, 72 years old, sleeping on an iron bed frame in a house with no electricity, with $148 of her own in a purse on a nail by the door, and she looked out at a field she had planted with her own hands, and she understood, for the first time in her life, that she had not ended. She had, somehow, against every expectation, begun. May turned into June the way June always comes to Kentucky, in a slow flood of green that seemed to take the whole world by surprise, even though it happened every year. Eleanor woke every morning before 5 and walked out to the field with a tin cup of coffee in her hand and stood at the edge of it for a few minutes before she started work, just looking, because the looking was a thing she did not want to forget to do. The field had changed. The field kept changing. Every morning there was something different, something that had grown overnight, some new thing reaching up toward the sun that had not been there the day before. Her tomatoes were waist-high by the first week of June. She had staked them herself, going down the rows with bamboo poles Cyrus had cut for her from an old stand behind his barn, and she had tied each plant up with strips of cotton she had torn from an old bedsheet Marlene had given her. It took her 3 days to stake the whole tomato section. Her hands were blistered by the end of it, and her back hurt in places she had not known her back could hurt. But the tomatoes were up, and they were climbing, and when she walked between the rows at dusk she could smell them. That particular green tomato vine smell that was not like any other smell in the world, and she understood that she had not smelled it since she was a child. The corn was waist-high too, pushing up toward the blue summer sky in pale green columns that would become Hickory King corn by August, tall as a man, ears the size of her forearm. The beans had climbed their poles already. The rattlesnake beans were putting out their first flowers, small purple blooms that would become pods streaked with purple against green like something painted. The melons were sprawling across their patch, big-leafed and aggressive, sending out runners in every direction. And the Jenny Lind melons. She checked them twice a day. The Jenny Lind. Marlene had told her those seeds were almost gone from the world, and 31 of the 38 Eleanor had planted had come up, and Eleanor walked past them every morning and said, silently in her head, "Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back." Jimmy Holleran had brought the drip line on that first Saturday, and then he had come back the next Saturday with more of it, and then the Saturday after that with a truckload of composted horse manure from a horse farm he knew outside Lexington. He did not ask for payment. He did not make conversation beyond what was necessary to unload the truck. He just did the work, stood awkwardly with Eleanor for a few minutes after it was done, drank a cup of coffee on the porch, and left. Eleanor did not push him to talk. She understood that he was doing something he did not know how to do, and that the doing of it was important, and that the talking about it was not. She let him come and go in his own time. By the second week of June, she had help she had not asked for. A woman named Darla came out one morning with her 2 grandchildren, 12 and 9, and asked if Eleanor could use hands. Darla was Marlene's cousin, a widow who worked part-time at the post office, and she had heard about the farm at church. Eleanor put the children to work picking stones out of the row paths where she wanted to plant a second round of beans. The children had never worked in a field in their lives. They did not know what poison ivy looked like. They did not know how to tell a tomato seedling from a weed. They knew nothing. And yet they came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and by the end of June they were coming out 3 times a week, and the younger one, the boy, whose name was Micah, had developed a particular attachment to the Jenny Lind melons. He had named one of them. He called it Big Boy. He came every morning to check on Big Boy. Eleanor watched him squat down next to his chosen melon and talk to it, the way she had talked to tomatoes as a child on this same land, and she understood that something was happening that she had not planned for and could not have planned for. That was, in some way, the most important thing that had happened to her in decades. Cyrus came out 4 or 5 times a week. He did not work as hard as he had in April, when they had been clearing the field. He was 85 years old, and he paid for a full day of labor with a week of aching joints. But he came. He brought tools. He brought advice. He brought, one morning in the 3rd week of June, a second-hand walk-behind tiller he had bought at an estate sale for $40, and he left it in her barn without saying a word about it. Eleanor made a list of the people who had helped her. She kept the list in her notebook. She did not know why she was keeping it, except that she wanted to. At the top was Marlene, then Cyrus, then Jimmy Holleran, which still seemed strange when she wrote it, then Darla, and the children, Micah and his older sister, Brooke, then 2 men from the Methodist church who had come out one Saturday with shovels, then an old woman named Ruth, who had shown up with a pie and a cutting from her own tomato patch, a variety Eleanor had never heard of, a small yellow pear tomato Ruth's mother had grown in the 1940s. Then a high school boy named Caleb, 17, who was working for his grandmother, who knew Cyrus, and who had spent 2 whole Saturdays weeding Eleanor's corn rows without complaint. By the end of June, the list had 21 names on it. Eleanor sat on her porch one evening with the list in front of her and tried to understand how this had happened. She had arrived in Millbrook 7 weeks ago with nothing and nobody. She now had 21 people who had worked on her land without asking for pay. Some of them she had barely met. Some of them she had not yet thanked. All of them had come. And there was a thing that was happening that she did not have words for, except that it had something to do with her grandmother, and something to do with the seeds, and something to do with the fact that small towns, when they are not quite dead yet, have a way of noticing when a thing is trying to come back. The first tomato ripened on July 19th. It was a mortgage lifter, one of the first she had planted, in the middle of the big field. Eleanor saw it that morning at dawn, a single fat pink-red tomato hanging from a vine that had been green fruit the day before. She walked up to it. She stood and looked at it. She did not pick it yet. She walked back to the house and made a cup of coffee and brought it out to the field and sat on an overturned bucket next to the tomato plant and drank her coffee and watched the sun come up on the first ripe tomato from her grandmother's seeds. Then she picked it. She held it in her hand. It was warm from the morning. It weighed close to a pound. It was pink shading to deep red at the bottom, with a little crack at the top where the vine had strained to hold it, the way mortgage lifters always cracked a little because they were too big for their own vines. It smelled like tomato, like a real tomato, like every tomato Eleanor had ever eaten as a child, and like almost no tomato she had eaten since 1965. She took it back to the house. She washed it at the hand pump. She sliced it on a board on the porch with the paring knife Marlene had given her. She sat down with a salt shaker and a piece of bread from Marlene's kitchen, and she ate a slice of the first tomato from her grandmother's field, and she cried. She cried with the tomato juice running down her chin and the bread in her other hand. And she was laughing too, laughing and crying at the same time, because the tomato tasted exactly the way she remembered, exactly the way her grandmother's tomatoes had always tasted, and she had not thought, all these years, that she would ever taste that taste again. She wrapped 4 more tomatoes in a towel, and walked them into town. She walked the 3 miles because she did not have a car, and it did not occur to her to wait for a ride. She walked into Sue's diner with the towel full of tomatoes and set them on the counter in front of Marlene. Marlene looked at them. She picked one up. She smelled it. Then she took it into the kitchen and sliced it and put it on a plate with a little salt, and she came back out and sat down at the counter next to Eleanor and took a bite. Marlene chewed. Her face did not move for a long moment. Then the tears started coming down her cheeks without her seeming to notice, and she chewed, and she swallowed, and she said, very quietly, "Eleanor. I know. Eleanor. Oh my God. I know. My mother. My mother's tomatoes. This is what they tasted like. I know." Marlene set the slice down. She put her hand over her mouth. She sat there for a full minute not speaking. Eleanor drank a glass of water Marlene had poured her and waited. Finally, Marlene took her hand away from her mouth. Her eyes were still wet. "Eleanor, I have not tasted a tomato like that in 40 years. No, I did not know I was going to taste a tomato like that again in my life. No. Eleanor, do you understand what you have?" Eleanor looked at the sliced tomato on the plate. She looked at Marlene. She looked out the diner window at Main Street, where 2 old men were walking slowly toward the post office, and a young mother was pushing a stroller toward the library. She looked at Millbrook. She thought about what Marlene had said that first morning, about the town dying, about young people leaving and not coming back. She thought about the 21 names in her notebook. She thought about her grandmother, who had grown these same tomatoes on this same land for 60 years. "I'm starting to," Eleanor said. "I'm starting to understand. You need to sell these," Marlene said. "You need to sell these at the Louisville Farmers Market this Saturday. You need to put a sign up that says what they are. You need to let people taste them. How many do I have that are ripe? I've got, I don't know, 40, 50. More ripening every day. By Saturday, it'll be 150 maybe." "All right." Marlene took out her phone. "I'm calling the market. There's a wait list for stalls, but I'm calling anyway." The Louisville market had a 6-month wait list. Marlene got off the phone and said, "Well, that's no good." Then she called the smaller market, the one in Bardstown, which had a 1-month wait list. Then she called the even smaller one in Lebanon, which had no wait list because it was a church parking lot market that nobody had heard of. Lebanon it would be. She signed Eleanor up for Saturday. $30 for a stall. Eleanor paid her back from the money she had set aside from the sale of her wedding ring, which she had done 2 weeks earlier when it became clear she was going to need tools. She had sold the ring Harold had given her in 1973 for $190 at a pawn shop in Lexington. Marlene had driven her. Marlene had not said a word about it. Eleanor had held the ring in her palm for a long time in the pawn shop parking lot before she went inside, and then she had gone inside, because it was a ring, and she had 73 acres and 47 varieties of heirloom seeds, and Harold, if he had been alive, would have told her to sell the damn ring without a second thought. On Saturday morning, Eleanor and Marlene drove to Lebanon in Marlene's truck with 4 crates of tomatoes and a cooler of bagged beans and a basket of the first small summer squash. Eleanor had not slept. She had stayed up most of the night arranging the tomatoes by variety and size, writing little cards for each one that said what it was and where it came from. Cherokee Purple, Mortgage Lifter, Brandywine, Arkansas Traveler. Each card said Estelle Whitfield's Heirloom Seeds, Millbrook, Kentucky, grown on the Whitfield farm since 1920. Marlene had suggested the sign. Marlene had understood, in a way Eleanor had not yet fully understood, that this was not about tomatoes. This was about a story, and the story was what would sell the tomatoes. The Lebanon market was in the parking lot of a Baptist church. 8 vendors, mostly Amish families selling jams and baked goods, 2 older farmers selling summer squash and green beans, a beekeeper. Eleanor set up her card table at the end of the row. She arranged the tomatoes in shallow wooden crates Cyrus had given her, each variety in its own crate, with the hand-lettered cards in front. Marlene stood back and looked at the display and said, "Eleanor, it looks beautiful." And it did. The tomatoes were every color. Deep red, pink, purple-black, green streaked with yellow, orange, pale yellow. They did not look like any tomatoes you could buy at a grocery store. They looked like something out of a painting. They looked like what tomatoes looked like before someone decided that tomatoes should all be round and red and hard enough to ship across the country without bruising. A woman in her 50s was the first customer. She walked past the table and stopped. She came back. She picked up a Cherokee purple, which was almost black on the top, fading to dark green at the bottom. What on earth is this? Cherokee purple. It's a tomato. Native American variety. Very sweet. This doesn't look like a tomato. It tastes like one. I promise. The woman smelled it. Her face changed. She smelled it again. She said, "Oh my lord. This smells like tomatoes used to smell." "Yes, ma'am. Can I taste a slice?" Eleanor had brought a cutting board and a knife and a salt shaker. She cut a slice of the Cherokee purple, and then one of the mortgage lifter, and then a brandy wine, and she put them on the board with a little pinch of salt on each one, and the woman tasted them. The woman closed her eyes. She ate the first slice. She ate the second. She ate the third. She did not open her eyes. When she finally opened them, she said, "I'll take all of them. All of them. All 3 tomatoes I just tasted." Eleanor weighed them out. 3 tomatoes. $3 a pound, which was what Marlene had told her to charge, because heirloom tomatoes at the Louisville market were going for 5 or 6, but Lebanon was smaller and she had to start somewhere. Total came to $8.40. The woman handed Eleanor a $10 bill and told her to keep the change. "Honey," the woman said, "I don't know who you are, but I grew up on my grandmother's farm in West Virginia, and I have not tasted a tomato like that in 30 years. Whatever you're doing, do not stop." Eleanor said, "I won't." The woman walked away with her tomatoes. Eleanor watched her go. She looked at the $10 bill in her hand. She turned to Marlene. "Marlene, that was the first money I have ever earned from my own land." Marlene was crying. She was not hiding it. "I know, Eleanor. I know it was." By noon, Eleanor had sold 63 tomatoes. By 2 o'clock, she had sold all of them. She had sold the summer squash. She had sold the beans. She had a card table with nothing on it but empty crates and a stack of money that came to $241. $241. Eleanor sat down on a folding chair behind the card table and looked at the money. She counted it 3 times. $241. More money than she had earned in a single day in her entire life. She had worked for Harold's household for 43 years without drawing a salary. She had never had a job. She had raised 2 children and kept a house and cooked meals and mended clothes and done the 10,000 small things that women of her generation had done without being paid for them, because it was understood that what they did was not work, was instead some softer category of effort that did not require compensation. She had lived her whole life inside that understanding. And then at 72, she had stood behind a card table at a Baptist church in Lebanon, Kentucky, and earned $241 in 6 hours. She thought about Harold. She thought about what Harold would have said if he had been alive to see it. Harold had been a good man, quiet and careful, a man who had believed that the man made the money and the woman kept the house, and this was simply how the world worked. He had not been cruel about it. He had just never questioned it. And Eleanor had not questioned it either. For 43 years, had not understood that she was capable of earning money with her own hands until she was 72 years old and had no other choice. "Harold," she said silently in her head. "Harold, I earned $241. It was a foolish thing to say to a dead husband. It did not matter. She said it anyway. That week she sold another 300 tomatoes out of her house. Word had gotten around. People drove out to the farm. Darla came with 3 of her friends from the post office. Ruth came back and brought her daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law brought 2 friends from a book club in Bardstown. Eleanor sold tomatoes off the porch, $3 a pound, and by the end of the week, she had made $450 more, and she had started to understand that she was going to have to think about scale. She could not keep up with the demand by picking tomatoes herself. She was 72 years old. Her hands were cramping at the end of each day. She had started waking up at 3 in the morning to harvest before the heat set in, and she was still not keeping up. She talked to Marlene. Marlene talked to Darla. Darla brought her grandchildren. The grandchildren brought 2 friends. By the first week of August, Eleanor had a crew of 6 local children, ages 9 to 15, who came every morning at sunrise and picked tomatoes for her for $2 an hour plus lunch, which Marlene packed in the diner kitchen and Eleanor served on the porch. The children ate peanut butter sandwiches and apples and drank lemonade Marlene sent out in mason jars, and they picked tomatoes with a seriousness that surprised Eleanor, because the children took the work seriously, and they asked questions, and they listened to the answers. Micah, the 9-year-old, had gone from checking on Big Boy the Jenny Lynn melon every morning to also checking on every other melon on the property, and he had started naming all of them. The Brandywine tomato plants had names. The tall stalks of Hickory King corn had names. One of the older girls, Brooke, who was 12, had started a notebook in which she wrote down what Eleanor told her about each variety, where it came from, who had bred it, what it was used for. Brooke was writing a history of Eleanor's grandmother's seed collection without being asked to. On a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of August, a black Mercedes SUV with Louisville plates pulled into Eleanor's driveway. Eleanor was on the porch shelling beans. She looked up and watched the car come up the dirt road. A man got out. He was in his late 30s, wearing chef's whites under a linen jacket, with close-cropped dark hair and an expression of curiosity that did not quite hide a more serious purpose underneath. He walked up to the porch. "Mrs. Whitfield?" "Yes. My name is David Chun. I run a restaurant in Louisville called Fieldstone. A customer brought me a tomato last week and told me where she got it. I drove out to ask if I could talk to you about your farm." Eleanor set down the bowl of beans. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Chun, please, sit down. I'll make you coffee." "I don't want to impose." "It's not imposing. It's just coffee." He sat down on the porch step. Eleanor went inside and heated water on the camp stove. She brought out 2 tin cups of coffee and a plate of the corn muffins Marlene had sent that morning. David Chin took one. He took a bite. He stopped chewing. "Ma'am, what is in this muffin?" "That's Hickory King cornmeal. From corn I grew and Cyrus ground for me on a little mill he has in his barn." David Chin chewed slowly. He looked at the muffin. He looked at Eleanor. "I have eaten cornbread my whole life. I have never eaten cornbread that tastes like this." "No, I don't imagine you have. How much Hickory King corn do you have?" "I planted half an acre. It'll be ready to harvest in about 3 weeks." "How much grain will that produce?" "Cyrus figures about 400 pounds. David Chin looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I would like to buy all of it." "All of it? All 400 pounds? I will pay you $6 a pound, which I know is about 8 times the market rate for regular corn. I will pay you cash on delivery. I will drive my truck up here myself when it's ready. I will also buy any tomatoes you have to spare between now and frost. Whatever you can produce. I'll pay $6 a pound for the tomatoes too." Eleanor was quiet for a long time. $6 a pound. 6 times 400 was $2,400. For the corn alone. "Mr. Chun, I don't understand. Why are you offering me so much more than the market rate?" David Chun took another bite of the corn muffin. He chewed. He swallowed. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I went to culinary school. I worked for 12 years in restaurants in New York and Chicago and San Francisco. I have cooked with every kind of ingredient you can imagine. I have never, in my career, tasted a cornmeal that tasted like this. Never. And the reason I have never tasted it is because the corn that was bred to taste this way isn't grown anymore. It's all dent corn now. Yellow dent number 2. Industrial commodity corn. 3,000 acres of identical plants producing identical kernels, producing identical tasteless feed. What you have here is a variety that nobody grows anymore because it doesn't yield enough to be profitable at industrial scale. But at my scale, where I'm cooking for 60 people a night, and they're paying me $80 for an entree, that corn is worth everything." Eleanor listened. She was trying to hold in her mind what he was saying and also what it meant. 400 pounds of corn, $2,400. And the tomatoes on top of that. "Mr. Chun, I need to ask you something." "Of course. If I grew more next year, more corn, more tomatoes, more of all of it, would you buy it?" "Yes." "How much could I grow that you would buy?" David Chin looked at her. He set his coffee cup down. "Mrs. Whitfield, I have friends who own restaurants in Lexington, in Nashville, in Cincinnati. I can call them tonight if you want. Between the 4 of us, I can tell you with complete certainty that we could absorb 10,000 pounds of heirloom produce per season. Maybe more. Your biggest problem is not going to be selling it. Your biggest problem is going to be growing it." Eleanor sat with this for a moment. 10,000 pounds. At $6 a pound. $60,000. Her hands were shaking a little. She put them around her coffee cup to still them. "Mr. Chun, I'm 72 years old. I have 6 local children helping me pick. I have friends who help me with tractor work. I don't have the kind of operation that can produce 10,000 pounds of anything." "Not yet," he said. "But you could. You have the land. You have the seeds. You have, if I can say so, the most important thing, which is the quality. I can buy pretty tomatoes anywhere. I can't buy these tomatoes anywhere except from you. So the question, Mrs. Whitfield, is whether you want to grow this into something. Because if you do, there is a market waiting for you. I am telling you as a person who knows the industry. There is a market waiting for you. Eleanor was quiet. She thought about Micah, her 9-year-old, who was out in the melon patch right now, probably talking to Big Boy. She thought about Brooke, her 12-year-old, who was writing the history of her grandmother's seeds. She thought about Cyrus, who would not be here forever. She thought about Marlene, who had told her that she did not think this was just a field. She thought about her grandmother. Mr. Chun, she said, can I think about it and call you? Of course. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. Take as much time as you need. But Mrs. Whitfield, I drove 2 hours to get here today. I did not drive 2 hours for nothing. I want to work with you. I want my kitchen to be supplied by your farm. I will wait for your answer. He finished his coffee. He stood up. He walked to his car. He started to get in. Then he paused and looked back at her. Mrs. Whitfield, one more thing. Yes. The tomato the woman brought me. The Cherokee purple. When I tasted it, I cried. I don't cry easily. I want you to know that. I cried. I understand. I don't think you do. I don't think you understand what you have. He got in his car. He drove away. Eleanor sat on the porch with his business card in her hand for a long time. She did not move. The bowl of beans sat next to her, half-shelled. The sun moved across the porch. The afternoon went on. When Marlene pulled up at 4 o'clock with a casserole she had brought for Eleanor's dinner, Eleanor was still sitting in the same spot, with the business card still in her hand. Marlene came up on the porch and looked at her. Eleanor, are you all right? Marlene, sit down. Marlene sat down. Eleanor handed her the business card. Marlene read it. Marlene looked up. David Chun, the Fieldstone. Eleanor, that's one of the best restaurants in Louisville. It's the best restaurant in Louisville. What is this? Why do you have his card? He was here 2 hours ago. He sat on this porch and drank coffee with me. David Chun sat on this porch. Yes. And he wants to buy everything. The corn, the tomatoes, all of it. $6 a pound. Marlene said nothing. Her mouth was open slightly. She closed it. She opened it again. She said, $6 a pound. Yes. For everything. Yes. Eleanor. I know. Eleanor. I know, Marlene. Marlene sat down on the porch step. She looked out at the field, at the rows of tomatoes, heavy now with fruit in all colors, drooping under their own weight. At the corn, tall and green, tasseled already, starting to form ears. At the melon patch where Micah was probably talking to Big Boy. At the beans climbing their poles. At all of it. Eleanor, I have been thinking all summer that something was happening out here. Something that was bigger than you and bigger than me. I have been thinking it and not saying it because I didn't want to put too much on you. But Eleanor, you know I'm right, don't you? I know. What are you going to do? Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the 10,000 pounds. $60,000. She thought about the fact that she could not grow 10,000 pounds alone, could not grow it with 6 children either, could not grow it without help that she did not yet have, but could find. She thought about what it would mean, here, in Millbrook, if she did. Marlene, she said, I think I'm going to need to hire people. All right. I think I'm going to need to buy equipment. All right. I think I'm going to need a truck. All right. I think I'm going to have to figure out how to grow this into something much bigger than I ever thought I was going to do. All right. I'm 72 years old. Eleanor, you are 72 years old and you are stronger than any woman I know. Don't tell me about your age like it's an obstacle. Your age is not the obstacle. The obstacle is figuring out how to do this. And we are going to figure that out. Eleanor looked at her. We? Yes. Marlene, this is my farm, not yours. Eleanor, I am 64 years old. I have been a waitress for 41 years. I own a diner that loses money half the months of the year. I have 3 children who are grown and gone and don't need me. I have been looking for a reason to get out of bed in the morning for about 8 years. If you don't want my help, I'll walk away. But if you're asking, I am telling you. I want in. I want to be part of this. I have been part of this since the first morning you walked into my diner. Let me be part of it for real. Eleanor looked at Marlene, her friend, her first friend in Millbrook, the woman who had taken her in when she had nowhere to go, the woman who had driven her to the farm and told her it was beautiful, the woman who had stood up at the auction and bid against Jimmy Holleran to protect her. the woman who had brought her dinner every night for 3 months. "All right," Eleanor said. "All right, Marlene. Let's be partners." "Partners? Partners?" Marlene started laughing. It was a laugh Eleanor had not heard before, a laugh of startled joy, a laugh of a woman who had not expected to be offered a thing she had been wanting for years without naming. "All right, Eleanor. All right. Partners. What do we do first?" "I don't know. I don't either. I suppose we call David Chun and tell him yes." "Yes. Let's do that." Eleanor went inside to find her phone. She had a phone now, a simple flip phone Jimmy Holleran had brought her 2 weeks earlier, saying he had an extra one from the business. She did not know how to text with it, but she could make calls. She dialed the number on David Chen's card. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Whitfield. Mr. Chun, I want to accept your offer. All of it. And I'm going to start planning for next year to grow more." "Wonderful. Wonderful. Mrs. Whitfield, you have made my week." "Mr. Chun, I have a business partner now. A woman named Marlene. She's going to be doing a lot of the planning with me. I hope you don't mind." "I don't mind at all. I look forward to meeting her." "Mr. Chun, one more thing. I want you to know that I am going to give my grandmother's seeds to as many local families as want them. I am not going to keep this to myself. This is Millbrook's history. It should be Millbrook's future. I am going to be selling you a portion of what I grow, but I am also going to be sharing the seeds. I want you to understand that from the beginning." There was a pause on the line. Then David Chun said, "Mrs. Whitfield, that is one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever said to me about their farm. Of course, that is the correct thing to do. I would only ask, if you don't mind, that I be allowed to tell my customers about you, about your grandmother, about what you are doing. Would that be all right?" Yes, that would be all right." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. I'll see you in 3 weeks for the corn." Eleanor hung up the phone. She turned to Marlene. She said, "Partner, we just became a business." "Partner, we did." They stood on the porch. The sun was going down behind the treeline. The crickets were starting up. Somewhere a whippoorwill was calling. The field, Eleanor's field, the field she had planted with her own hands from her grandmother's seeds, stretched out in front of them in the gathering dusk, and the tomatoes on the vines were catching the last light of the day, and they were all different colors, and they were all heavy with fruit, and they were all ready, at last, to begin the work that every seed is planted to do, which is to feed people, and to keep going, and to make more of themselves, and to remind whoever eats them what the world used to taste like and could taste like again. The corn came ripe in the first week of September. David Chun drove up himself in a refrigerated truck, and he, Eleanor, Marlene, Cyrus, and the 6 children spent an entire Saturday picking and loading. The corn was beautiful. Hickory King, each ear a foot long, kernels the size of pennies, so dense with starch they would have to be dried before they could be ground. David Chun paid Eleanor $2,400 in cash on the spot. He also took 3 crates of tomatoes and a basket of Jenny Lind melons. The Jenny Lind. Eleanor had harvested 12 of them so far, and she had given one to Micah to keep for himself, because Big Boy had grown into a 12-pound melon and Micah had earned that melon in Eleanor's estimation. The other 11 she had set aside. David Chun had picked up one of them, smelled it, and then carefully, reverently, set it down. "Mrs. Whitfield, these melons, these are Jenny Lind. I know what these are. I know what it took for these to be here. My grandmother saved them. Your grandmother is a hero. My grandmother was just a farmer. Mrs. Whitfield, your grandmother was not just a farmer. I want to be very clear with you about that. Your grandmother was a preservationist, a scientist in her way, a person doing work that the whole agricultural establishment failed to do. I want you to understand what she was." "I'm starting to." David Chun paid $500 for 5 of the Jenny Lind melons. He left the others with Eleanor and made her promise to save seeds from at least half of them, which she already planned to do, because she had known what she had to do about the Jenny Lind from the moment Marlene had told her how rare they were. By the end of September, Eleanor had cleared $9,000. She had paid her children's crew. She had paid Cyrus for tractor work, over his objections. She had paid Marlene a partnership share they had worked out on a napkin, which was 30% of net, a number Marlene had argued against but Eleanor had insisted on. She had paid for seed storage supplies. She had paid for 200 feet of new fencing to protect the garden from deer. She had set aside $2,000 for winter living expenses and another $2,000 for next spring's supplies. She still had over $3,000 in a bank account with her own name on it, an account she had opened in August at the Millbrook Community Bank, where she walked in with her driver's license and her deed and a canvas bag full of cash, and the bank manager had looked up and said, "You must be Eleanor Whitfield," and she had understood that she had become, without noticing it, a person people in this town knew by name. On the first Sunday of October, she walked into the Methodist church in Millbrook for the first time since she had arrived. She had meant to go earlier. She had not made it. It had been a summer of dawn to dusk work, and Sundays had been the one day she had allowed herself to sleep until 6. But on the first Sunday in October, with the harvest mostly in and the tomato vines starting to brown and the corn all cut and drying in Cyrus's barn, she put on her blue cotton dress that Marlene had bought her at the yard sale, and she walked into church. The minister was a woman, younger than Eleanor had expected, in her 40s maybe, with a kind face and a clear voice. Her name was Reverend Holly. She had been at the church for 3 years. Eleanor sat in the back pew and listened to the sermon, which was on the parable of the mustard seed, which Eleanor thought was very fitting, though she also thought Reverend Holly could not possibly know how fitting it was. After the service, Reverend Holly caught Eleanor at the door and said, "You must be Eleanor Whitfield. I've been wanting to meet you for months. I'm sorry I haven't come before. I've been farming." "Yes, I know. Eleanor, I want to ask you something." "Yes. The whole town knows about your farm." "The whole town, Eleanor. People talk about it at the grocery store. People talk about it at the post office. People talk about it on the bleachers at the high school football games. There is not a person in Millbrook who does not know that Estelle Whitfield's granddaughter came back and is growing her grandmother's seeds." Eleanor did not know what to say. "Eleanor, I want to ask you if you would come to our harvest dinner in 2 weeks. We have it every October. It's a potluck. Everybody comes. I would like you to come. I would like you to bring a dish if you want, or not if you don't want to. But I would like you to come, and I would like you to stand up and say a few words, if you're willing. I think people want to hear from you." Eleanor thought about it. She thought about standing up in front of the whole town. She had not spoken in front of more than 3 people in her life. She had played piano for choir. That was different. That was not the same. "Reverend, I don't know if I'm the right person to give a speech." "You don't have to give a speech. Just come. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them about your grandmother. That's all." Eleanor looked at Reverend Holly. She thought about it. She thought about what it would mean to stand up in front of Millbrook and speak about Estelle Whitfield and the seeds and the field and the future she was beginning to see. "All right," she said. "All right. I'll come." "Thank you, Eleanor." "Reverend, one more thing." "Yes. I'd like to bring corn muffins, made from my grandmother's Hickory King cornmeal. Would that be all right?" Reverend Holly's eyes softened. "Eleanor, that would be better than all right. That would be a blessing." Eleanor walked home from church that morning the long way, 3 miles through the country roads, past fields that were brown now with the end of the season, past the old schoolhouse where her grandmother had taught for 2 years in the 1920s before she got married, past the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She stopped at the cemetery. She walked up the slope to her grandmother's grave. Estelle Whitfield, 1898 to 1972. Beloved mother, wife of Thomas. Eleanor stood at the grave. She had not been here since she was 15. The marker was worn. Someone had cleaned it recently, she noticed. The grass around it was trimmed. She wondered who had done it. She thought perhaps it had been Cyrus. She did not know what to say. She stood there for a long time. Then she said, out loud, because there was no one to hear her, "Grandma, I came back. I came back with your seeds. They're all up. They're all growing. I'm growing them, Grandma. I'm giving them away to the town. I'm doing what I think you wanted me to do. I hope I'm doing it right." She stood there a while longer. The wind moved through the old sycamores at the edge of the cemetery. A crow called. Somewhere far off a church bell rang the noon hour. "Grandma, thank you for the seeds. Thank you for knowing I would come back, even when I didn't know. Thank you for waiting. Thank you." She wiped her eyes. She walked back down the slope. She walked the last mile and a half home with the October sun on her face and the smell of wood smoke in the air from somebody's chimney. And when she came up over the last rise and saw her farmhouse at the end of the dirt road, with its patched roof and its boarded windows and the big field behind it, she stopped for a moment, and she looked at it, and she thought, "This is mine. This is really mine. I made this. I came back and I made this. She did not know, yet, what was coming. She did not know that in 2 weeks she would stand up at the harvest dinner and speak in front of 317 people. She did not know that in 6 weeks a reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal would drive out to her farm and write a story that would run on the front page of the Sunday edition under the headline Seed Keeper, the Kentucky grandmother bringing a vanished farm back to life. She did not know that the story would be picked up by the Associated Press and run in newspapers in 22 states. She did not know that her phone would start ringing with calls from seed companies and universities and public radio shows and filmmakers. She did not know any of that yet. She knew only that the field was resting now, that the tomato vines were dying back, that the corn was drying in Cyrus's barn, and that in the spring she would plant again, and she would plant twice as much, and she would feed more people, and she would give away more seeds. She knew that she had begun a thing she could not yet see the end of, and that it did not matter that she could not see the end of it, because the beginning was enough, because the beginning was the hardest part, and she had survived it. She walked up onto her porch. She sat down in the rocking chair Jimmy Holleran had brought her from a yard sale in September. She looked out at her field. "All right, Grandma," she said. "I did it. I made it to the end of the first season. I'll see you in the spring." The sun was going down behind the hills. The field was in shadow. The first stars were coming out over Kentucky, clear and cold and patient. The same stars that had watched over her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother and everyone who had ever worked this land for as long as anyone had worked it. Eleanor rocked in her chair. She was tired. She was 72 years old, and she was tired. And she was happy. She was, for the first time she could remember, completely and unreservedly happy. Not because everything was fixed, not because the world had been made right, but because she had done a thing she had set out to do, and the doing of it had been hard, and the doing of it had been worth it, and the doing of it was not yet over. And in the morning, when the sun came up, there would be more to do, and she would get up and do it. She rocked in her chair until it was fully dark. Then she went inside, lit a candle, ate a bowl of soup Marlene had left her, and went to sleep in her grandmother's bed, in her grandmother's house, on her grandmother's land, under a roof she had patched with her own hands, listening to the coyotes in the distance and the wind in the eaves and the slow, steady settling of a house that was no longer abandoned. In the morning she would get up. In the morning the work would begin again. But for tonight, for one night, she allowed herself to rest. She had earned it. The harvest dinner at the Methodist Church was on a Saturday evening in the 3rd week of October. Eleanor spent 2 days before it baking corn muffins in Marlene's oven, because Eleanor still did not have an oven of her own, and the church kitchen could not fit all of them, and Marlene had insisted. They made 300 corn muffins. Eleanor ground the Hickory King cornmeal fresh for each batch on Cyrus's little hand mill in his barn. She had never made corn muffins in this quantity in her life. Her hands cramped. Marlene rubbed them out with lotion at the end of each day and told her to stop complaining and that women had been making corn muffins for 300 people with cramping hands since the Bible was new, which made Eleanor laugh. The church hall was full by 6 o'clock. Eleanor had not expected it to be full. She had thought perhaps 100 people. There were, by Reverend Holly's count, 317 people there. Every pew was full. The folding chairs were full. People were standing along the back wall. Eleanor sat at a table with Marlene and Cyrus and Darla and the children, and she ate a plate of food she could barely taste because her stomach was turning over on itself with nerves. Reverend Holly stood up at 7 o'clock. She welcomed everyone. She said grace. She spoke for a few minutes about gratitude, about harvest, about the old ways of the town and the new ways coming. And then she said, "Tonight we have a speaker, a woman some of you have met and most of you have heard about, Eleanor Whitfield, Estelle Whitfield's granddaughter. She has come back to Millbrook this year after 58 years away, and she has done something in her first season here that I want her to tell you about herself. Eleanor, would you come up?" Eleanor stood up. Her knees were unsteady. She walked to the front of the hall. She had not prepared a speech. She had told Marlene she did not know what to say. Marlene had told her to say what was true and let the rest take care of itself. Eleanor stood at the microphone. She looked out at the faces. Most of them she did not know. Some of them she did. She saw Jimmy Holleran standing at the back, with his cap in his hands, watching her. She saw Cyrus at her table, nodding at her. She saw Marlene, with tears already in her eyes, mouthing something that looked like "You got this." She saw Darla's grandchildren, Micah and Brooke, sitting together and looking up at her with the particular open-faced attention of children who understood that something important was happening. She cleared her throat. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield," she said. "I was born in this town. I left when I was 15. I came back this past April because I had nowhere else to go." She paused. The hall was completely silent. "My son put me out of his house," she said, "on my 72nd birthday. He gave me a cardboard box with my things in it and $300 cash and told me I had until sunset to be gone." Someone in the hall made a sound. Eleanor could not tell what kind of sound it was. "I am telling you this not because I want pity. I am telling you this because it is where this story starts. In that box my son gave me, there was a tin, and in that tin were seeds. My grandmother's seeds. Estelle Whitfield's seeds. 47 varieties that she saved on this land for 60 years of her life, and then gave to me when I was 15 years old, and told me to keep until I needed them." Eleanor's voice was getting stronger. She did not know where it was coming from, but she could feel it steady under her. "I kept them for 58 years. I did not know why. I just knew that my grandmother had told me to keep them. And I kept them. And when my son put me out, I took them with me, and I got on a bus, and I came back here, because I did not know where else to go." She paused. She looked out at the hall. "You all know the rest. Most of you. I bought my grandmother's land at the county auction for $1,100, which was not my money. It was Cyrus Peterson's money, and I am still working on paying him back, though he tells me not to, and we argue about it. And I am going to win that argument eventually because I was raised not to take things I can't pay for. I planted the seeds. They came up. People helped me. So many people helped me. I have a list at home of 21 people who helped me in the first 3 months, and the list is longer now, and it will be longer still by this time next year." She swallowed. "I have some things I want to say to you tonight. The first thing is thank you. To Cyrus, and to Marlene, and to Jimmy Holleran, who some of you are surprised to see at my table, but who has been one of the best friends I have made here, and who brought me drip line and compost, and did not charge me for any of it. To Darla, and the children, who worked for me all summer for $2 an hour, and who I could not have fed this town without. To the Methodist Church, and to Reverend Holly, who welcomed me without knowing me. To all of you, thank you. I did not come back here expecting to be welcomed. I came back here expecting to be alone. You did not let me be alone. I will not forget it." She wiped her eyes. She went on. "The second thing I want to say is about the seeds. My grandmother saved these seeds because they mattered. She did not know exactly why they mattered, I think. She just knew they did. Now we know why. The world has gotten smaller in the way that matters. The varieties of food we grow have shrunk to almost nothing. Most of the tomatoes in America are one of maybe 10 varieties bred for shipping, not flavor. Most of the corn is 3 varieties bred for yield. We have lost 95% of the vegetable varieties that were being grown in this country 100 years ago. 95%. Gone. Into paper envelopes and seed banks, where they sleep, but do not grow. Where they wait, but do not feed anyone." She paused. "My grandmother saved 47 varieties. I am telling you this tonight because I want you to understand what my grandmother did. She was not just a farmer. She was a keeper. She kept alive things that almost everyone else let die. And she gave them to me, and I am giving them to you. To all of you. I am going to sell my produce to restaurants, because I have to make a living, and the restaurants will pay. But the seeds I am going to give away. Any family in this town that wants to grow my grandmother's tomatoes next year can come to my farm in April, and I will give them seedlings for free. Any family that wants to save seeds themselves, I will teach them how. Any child who wants to learn, I will teach them. This is what my grandmother wanted. I know it is. I feel it. This is why she kept these seeds for 60 years and gave them to a 15-year-old girl and told her to keep them until she needed them." She looked out. She saw Micah. The boy was standing up. He was looking at her with his whole face. "The third thing I want to say is this. I am 72 years old. I do not know how many more seasons I have. I am going to plan as hard as I can every one of them. But I need help. I need this town to help me. I need young people to come and learn what I am doing, so that when I am gone, this does not go with me. I need hands, and I need hearts, and I need patience, because what we are doing is slow work, and it takes years to see the difference. But the difference will come. I promise you that. The difference will come." She stopped. She looked down at her hands on the microphone. She did not know what else to say. She said the only thing she could think of. Thank you for letting me come home. The hall was silent for about 2 seconds. Then everyone stood up. Everyone. 317 people standing up at once. The sound of chairs scraping and bodies rising. And then the applause, which went on, and on, and on. And Eleanor stood at the microphone with her hands over her face and cried, because she had come home, and they had let her, and she had not been sure until this moment that they had. After the applause faded, after people began to sit down, Reverend Holly came to the microphone and said, "There will be corn muffins and coffee served in the back. Eleanor has brought her grandmother's cornmeal, and I think everyone here would like to taste it." They lined up. 317 people lined up. Eleanor stood behind the muffin table with Marlene, handing out corn muffins one by one, and she watched people take a bite, and she watched their faces change, because the cornmeal was her grandmother's, and the corn had been grown on her grandmother's land, and there was something in it that could not be bought or counterfeited or industrialized, and people knew it as soon as it hit their tongues. An older woman took a muffin and bit into it, and stood there chewing for a long moment. Then she looked at Eleanor and said, quietly, "This tastes like my mother's kitchen. I have not tasted this since I was a little girl. I forgot what it tasted like. I forgot. Thank you." Eleanor took her hand. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. That night, driving home in Marlene's truck, Eleanor sat in silence. Marlene drove. The truck rattled over the country road. The headlights carved a tunnel through the dark. "Eleanor," Marlene said. "Yes. That was a thing I will never forget as long as I live." "Me? Neither. I want you to know something." "Yes. My husband used to tell me this town was dying. He used to say it would be gone in 20 years. He said there was no reason for young people to stay. He said all the work had moved away, and all the culture had moved away, and all the meaning had moved away. He said we were going to be a ghost town." "I know. Eleanor, you just gave this town a reason." Eleanor did not say anything. She looked out the window. The fields rolled past in the dark. The stars were clear and cold and old. "Marlene." "Yes. My grandmother gave me the reason. I just carried it." "Fine. Fine. She gave it. You carried it. Either way, it's here now. It's here now, and Millbrook has it. And something is going to happen, Eleanor. Something is going to happen that neither one of us has yet imagined." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they got to Eleanor's farm, Marlene stopped the truck at the end of the drive and did not drive in. The two women sat in the cab, looking up the dirt road at the farmhouse, which was a darker shape against the dark sky. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Marlene." Eleanor got out. She walked up the drive. She went inside. She lit a candle. She sat at the kitchen table. She took the tin of seeds out of the cabinet where she kept it. She opened it. She looked at the envelopes that remained. She had planted most of them this year, but she had saved seeds from every plant that had produced, and the tin was fuller now than when she had arrived. Fuller. She had planted 47 varieties and harvested from all of them and saved seeds from all of them, and the tin was fuller than her grandmother had given it to her, because that was what seed keepers did. They did not use seeds up, they multiplied them. She sat at the table and looked at the tin for a long time. She thought about the dinner. She thought about the faces. She thought about the woman who had tasted the corn muffin and remembered her mother's kitchen. She thought about what she had said. "I need this town to help me." She thought, "I said it and I meant it and they heard it. This town is going to help me. This town is going to come to the farm next spring for seedlings. This town is going to plant my grandmother's seeds in their gardens. This town is going to help me grow this into something bigger than me." She closed the tin. She put it back in the cabinet. She blew out the candle. She went to bed. Outside, the wind was coming up from the south. October in Kentucky, the last of the warm air before winter settled in. The field was resting. The seeds Eleanor had saved were sleeping in the tin. In the spring, they would wake up again. They would go into the ground. They would feed people. More people every year. She did not yet know how many. She did not yet know how far. But the first season was over. The first season was over, and she had made it through. She had arrived in April with a cardboard box and left October with $3,000 in the bank and a town behind her and a future in front of her. And the only thing that mattered now was what came next. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The house was quiet around her. The stars moved slowly across the Kentucky sky. And somewhere in the barn, Cyrus's old corn mill sat with a dusting of hickory king flower on its wheel, like snow, like the last memory of the harvest, like the promise of the one that was coming. The Louisville Courier-Journal reporter showed up on a Tuesday morning in the first week of November. Her name was Sarah Whitman. She was in her early 30s. She had heard about Eleanor from David Chun, who had mentioned the farm in an interview about his restaurant sourcing. Sarah Whitman spent 3 hours walking the field with Eleanor, taking photographs, asking questions, listening. She asked about the son. Eleanor told her about the cardboard box. Sarah Whitman wrote it down and did not look up from her notebook for a full minute. The story ran on the front page of the Sunday edition under a photograph of Eleanor standing in her field, holding a Cherokee purple tomato in her palm. The headline read Seed Keeper, the Kentucky grandmother bringing a vanished farm back to life. The article was 1,800 words long. It told the whole story. The box, the bus ticket, the auction, Cyrus, Marlene, the first tomato, David Chun, the corn muffins at the Methodist Church. Eleanor read it on Sunday morning at the diner, with a copy Marlene had driven to Lexington to buy, and she sat in the booth and read it twice, and then she folded it carefully and set it on the table and looked at Marlene. Marlene. She wrote about Derek. I know, honey. She wrote what he did. Yes. He's going to read this. I imagine so. Eleanor looked out the diner window at Main Street. It was November, and the sky was the color of pewter. She thought about Derek, 300 miles away, opening a newspaper someone had sent him, or seeing the story online, or getting a phone call from someone who had recognized the name. She thought about what he would feel. She thought about Ashley. She thought about Tyler, her grandson, who would read this story too. Well, Eleanor said, I suppose he'll call. Do you want him to? Eleanor thought about it. I don't know, Marlene. I don't know what I want. I want him to understand. I don't know if a phone call is going to do that. The Associated Press picked up the story on Wednesday. By Friday, it was running in newspapers from Portland to Tallahassee. By the following Tuesday, Eleanor's flip phone had received 41 calls, most of them from numbers she did not recognize. A producer from NPR's All Things Considered left a voicemail. A documentary filmmaker from Brooklyn left 3. A seed preservation foundation in Iowa offered her a research fellowship. The USDA sent a formal letter requesting samples of her Jenny Lynn melon seeds for the National Seed Bank. Eleanor read the letter at Marlene's kitchen table and laughed, because the USDA was the same institution that had let these varieties nearly go extinct by failing to fund their preservation for 50 years, and now they were writing polite letters to an old woman in Kentucky asking her to please share what she had. She sent them the seeds. She sent them generously. Her grandmother would have wanted her to. Her grandmother had not kept seeds to hoard them. She had kept them to pass them on. Derek called on the second Sunday in November. Eleanor was on the porch when the phone rang. She saw the name on the screen. She looked at it for a long time. She almost did not answer. Then she did. Mom. Derek. There was a long silence. She could hear him breathing. She did not help him. She did not fill the silence. She had spent 72 years filling silences for men who would not speak. She was done doing that. Mom. I read the article. All right. I didn't know. You didn't know what, Derek? I didn't know you had those seeds. I didn't know what Grandma had given you. I didn't know what was in the box. Mom. I didn't know. What did you think was in the box, Derek? Silence again. I thought it was I don't know. I thought it was old stuff. Sentimental stuff. I didn't know. Mom. I am so sorry. She listened. She waited. She thought. I am 72 years old, and my son is crying on the phone, and I am not crying with him. I am listening. There is a difference. Derek. Yes. Why did you put me out? He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was thin. Ashley said the kids needed the room. She said we couldn't afford to keep adding on to the house. She said, Mom, I'm not going to blame Ashley. I made the choice. I let her talk me into it. I should have told her no. I should have told her you weren't going anywhere. I didn't, and I don't have a good reason, and I'm sorry. Derek, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it truthfully. All right. If I had not landed on my feet, if I had gone to that Pine Bluff facility, if I had sat in a common room and watched television for 4 years and died there, would you have come to the funeral? He was silent. Derek, yes. Mom, of course I would have. Would you have cried at the funeral? Yes. Derek, I want you to think about the woman you would have been crying for. I want you to think about the woman who sat in that common room for 4 years and died there. I want you to think about that woman. Because that woman was almost me. That woman was almost the woman you would have been crying for. and I want you to think about whether the crying would have been for her, or whether the crying would have been for you." He made a sound. She could not tell if it was a sob or a word. "Derek, I am not saying this to punish you. I am saying this because I want you to understand what almost happened. And I want you to understand that it was not you who saved me from it. It was an 85-year-old man named Cyrus Peterson who remembered my grandmother, and a waitress named Marlene who gave me her couch, and a tin of seeds my grandmother pressed into my hand when I was 15. That is what saved me. Not my son. Not my family. An old man and a waitress and a tin of seeds. Mom, please. What can I do? Tell me what I can do." Eleanor looked out at the field. It was November, and the vines were brown, and the stalks were cut, and the ground was resting. She thought about what she could ask of him. She thought about what she wanted. "Derek, I want you to come down here. Alone. Not Ashley. Not the kids. Just you. I want you to come down here, and I want you to walk the field with me, and I want you to meet the people who helped me. I want you to see what your grandmother built and what I am building. And then I want you to go home and think about what kind of son you are going to be for the rest of my life, and what kind of grandson you were to her. And then we will talk. But not before. When you are ready. Not before. I am not going to chase you, Derek. I am not going to wait for you by the phone. I have a farm to run. I have work to do. You come when you come. I will be here." She hung up. She sat on the porch. Her hands were shaking. She put them around her tin coffee cup to still them. She thought about her grandmother, who had been told, at 22, that her own son had died of fever in Louisville, that her own son had not wanted to come home to see her, that he had chosen to die among strangers. Her grandmother had never spoken of it. Eleanor had heard the story only once, from her mother, in a whisper. Her grandmother had buried a son and then buried a husband and then kept on, and she had kept the seeds going, and she had given them to Eleanor. And now Eleanor was 72 and had just told her own son that he could come or not come, and she would be all right either way. I am stronger than I was, Eleanor thought. I am stronger than I have ever been. Derek came in December. He drove down alone on a Saturday morning. He pulled his car up the dirt road and parked in front of the farmhouse and sat in the car for a long time before he got out. Eleanor watched him from the porch. She did not wave. She did not go to meet him. She waited. When he got out, she saw that he had brought something with him. A cardboard box. The same cardboard box, she realized. The same one he had given her 9 months earlier. He walked up to the porch. He stopped at the bottom step. "Mom. Derek. I brought something." "I see." He held out the box. "I found it in the garage." Ashley had not donated everything. She had put some things in boxes, and the boxes ended up in the garage. "I found these. I brought them to you." Eleanor took the box. She set it on the porch beside her. She did not open it. "Come up, Derek. Sit down. I'll make coffee." He came up. He sat on the porch step, not in the rocking chair next to her, but on the step, like a boy. Eleanor went inside and heated water on the wood stove she had installed in October. She had electricity now and running water, but she still used the wood stove for coffee because she liked it. She brought out 2 tin cups and handed him one. "Mom, I read the article. I read it 4 times. All right. I saw what you built. I saw the pictures. I saw you in the field. Yes. I don't know what to say to you. You don't have to say anything. We can just sit. It's a nice morning. Sit and drink your coffee." They sat. The December morning was cold but clear. The field was bare, frosted. The stalks had been cut, and the beds mulched for winter. Smoke came up from the chimney of the farmhouse and drifted across the sky. Eleanor sipped her coffee. Derek sipped his. He did not say anything for a long time. Finally he said, "Mom, this is the most peaceful place I have ever been." Eleanor smiled. "Yes, it is. How did you do this? How did you do any of this?" "I planted a seed, Derek, and then I planted another one. And I did that 3,000 times. And people helped me. That is how I did it." "You did it at 72. 73 now. Next week." He turned to look at her. "Next week is your birthday." "Yes. Mom, I forgot." "It's all right, Derek. You'll remember next year." He put his face in his hands. He sat there with his face in his hands for a long time. Eleanor did not touch him. She did not soothe him. She sipped her coffee and watched the field and waited. When he finally lowered his hands, his face was wet and red. "Mom, I want you to forgive me." "Derek, I already have." He looked at her. "I forgave you on the bus ride down here in April," Eleanor said. "Somewhere between Cincinnati and Lexington. I forgave you because holding on to it was going to poison me, and I had seeds to plant. I forgave you, and I did not tell you because I did not want you to think forgiving meant forgetting. Forgiving does not mean forgetting, Derek. It means I am not going to carry the anger with me. It does not mean I trust you. It does not mean you can come back into my life the way you used to be. It means I am free. That's what it means. I am free. Derek nodded. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What do I do now, Mom? You go home. You think. You come back in the spring if you want to help me plant. You bring Tyler with you, if he'll come. I would like to meet my grandson properly before I die. I would like to teach him how to save seeds. I would like him to see that there is more than one way to be a man. All right. And Derek, listen to me. Yes. I am not coming back to Ohio. I am not going to the Pine Bluff facility. I am not moving into your basement. This is where I live now. This is where I will die. You understand that? Yes, Mom. I understand. All right. Finish your coffee. He finished it. He stood up. He looked at her one more time. He said, Mom, I love you. I love you too, Derek. Drive safe. He drove away. Eleanor sat on the porch until his car was out of sight, and then for a long time after. She did not open the cardboard box yet. She would open it later. She knew what was probably in it. Photo albums. Her mother's china. Harold's watch. Things that had mattered once and still mattered, but in a quieter way now, because she had built a new life that was not made of things but of work and people and the turning of seasons. She thought about what she had said. This is where I will die. It was true. She had known it since April. She was going to die on this land, at some point, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20, maybe 2. She was going to die here. And when she did, the seeds would go on, because she had been giving them away all summer, and she would give away more in the spring, and the seeds would be in dozens of gardens around Millbrook by next year, and in hundreds the year after, and they would not die with her. They would keep going. That was what her grandmother had taught her. That was why her grandmother had pressed the tin into her hand and said, you'll know when, Eleanor. These things keep. They wait. Eleanor was 73 years old. She had $240,000 in the bank from the season just ended, after paying taxes and partners and suppliers. She had a sound roof over her head. She had a farm that had been written about in 22 states. She had a town that knew her name and loved her and would carry her through whatever came next. She had a son who had come to apologize, and a grandson she was going to meet properly in the spring, and a partner named Marlene who she loved like a sister, and an old man named Cyrus who was still paying back a debt to a woman who had died 53 years ago. She had everything. The phone rang in February. It was Jimmy Holleran. Mrs. Whitfield. Jimmy, I wanted to tell you something. All right. I sold the nursery supply business. Oh, I sold it to my manager. For a good price. I told him he could pay me over 10 years. I wanted to tell you because I'm going to have time now, starting in April, and I was wondering if I could come work for you. On the farm. I mean work. I mean full-time. I mean I want to learn this. I want to learn what you're doing. Eleanor closed her eyes. She smiled. Jimmy, come on April 1st. I'll put you to work. I want to pay you back, Mrs. Whitfield. I want to pay you back for what I did at the auction. Jimmy, you paid me back a long time ago. The drip line. The compost. The rocking chair you brought me from the yard sale. You paid me back. This is something else. This is you wanted to be part of it. I understand the difference. Yes, ma'am. Come on April 1st, Jimmy. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table. She thought. He sold his business to come work for me. A man who laughed at me 10 months ago has just sold a business to come work for me. She thought about what she had told the harvest dinner. The difference will come. I promise you that. The difference will come. It was coming. It was already coming. Faster than she had expected. Spring came. The snow melted. The ground thawed. In the first week of April, Eleanor held a seedling day at the farm. She had announced it in the Millbrook newspaper and at the church and at the diner. She had started seedlings in February in a small greenhouse Cyrus had helped her build behind the farmhouse. Hundreds of seedlings. Thousands. She did not know how many people would come. 300 people came. They came from Millbrook and from Lebanon and from Bardstown and from as far as Louisville and Lexington. They came with boxes and trays and plastic bags. They came with their children. They came with their grandparents. They lined up along the drive, a line that stretched from the porch down to the mailbox, and Eleanor and Marlene and Jimmy and Cyrus and Darla and the children, the whole crew, they handed out seedlings for 5 hours. Every family got what they could plant. Every family got a small card with growing instructions Brooke had helped her print. Every family got a packet of seeds to save for the next year. At the end of the day, when the last person had left, Eleanor sat down on the porch and Marlene sat down beside her, and they did not speak for a long time. The greenhouse was almost empty. They had given away almost everything. Eleanor, Marlene said. Yes. We gave away 3,000 seedlings today. I know. That's 3,000 plants in 300 gardens. I know. By this time next year, your grandmother's seeds will be growing in every town within 50 miles of Millbrook. I know. Marlene put her hand on Eleanor's hand. They sat together in the April evening. The field was plowed and ready. The sun was setting behind the treeline. Somewhere in the back pasture, a dove was calling, a slow four-note song that went on and on. Eleanor. Yes. Your grandmother would be proud. Eleanor looked at the field. She thought about her grandmother at 15. At 22, burying a son. At 44, burying a husband. At 74, pressing the tin into her granddaughter's hand and saying you'll know when. At the end of a life that had looked, to most people, like nothing. Like a small farm in a small town in Kentucky. Like nothing at all. Marlene, Eleanor said. She was always proud. She was proud the day she gave me the seeds. She trusted me with them. She must have been proud already, even then, to trust me that way. Yes. What she is now, wherever she is not proud. She is something better than proud. She is at peace. She gave me the seeds, and I came home, and I planted them, and I gave them away. That's the whole story. That's what she wanted. And now it's done. Now it's done the way she hoped it would be done. And so she is at peace. Marlene was crying quietly. Eleanor, sometimes you say things. I know. Sometimes you say things, and I don't know what to do with them. I know. They sat on the porch until the stars came out. The dove stopped calling. A screech owl started up, somewhere in the woods, that high thin trill that sounded like a loose wire in the dark. Eleanor listened. She had not heard a screech owl in 60 years. She had forgotten that Kentucky had screech owls. She had forgotten so many things, over 60 years of not being here. And she was remembering them now, one by one, as they came back to her, as the land gave them back to her. Tyler came in May. Her grandson. He came with Derek, and he stayed for a week. And he was not the sullen child who had not spoken to her in 3 years. He was 15 years old, and he was curious. He had read about her online. He knew about the seeds. He knew about the farm. He asked questions the whole week. He wanted to know how to save tomato seeds. He wanted to know how deep to plant corn. He wanted to know how long the Jenny Lynn melons took to ripen. He followed Cyrus around the barn asking about the corn mill. He followed Jimmy around the field asking about drip irrigation. He sat on the porch with Eleanor in the evenings and listened to her stories about her grandmother. On the last night of his visit, he said, Grandma, can I come back next summer and work? Yes, Tyler. You can come back anytime. I think I want to do this someday. I think I want to have a farm. All right. Dad says it's not a real career. Your father is wrong about a lot of things. He is a good man and he loves you, but he is wrong about a lot of things. A farm is a real career. It is one of the oldest careers there is. It is the career that feeds everybody else. You come work with me any summer you want, Tyler. I will teach you everything I know. And what I do not know, Cyrus will teach you. And what he does not know, the land will teach you. You will learn. You will be fine. Tyler nodded. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Grandma, I'm sorry about what Dad did. It is not for you to apologize for, Tyler. Your father has apologized. That is enough. I know, but I wanted to say it. I wanted you to know that I know. All right, Tyler. Thank you. They sat on the porch. The June bugs were starting up. The fireflies were beginning to come out over the field. The first ones, thin scatter of green light in the dusk. Grandma, what happens to the farm when you? Someday. When I die, Tyler? Yes. Well, it goes to you and your father. Unless I change my mind, which I might. But for now, it goes to you. And I hope that when it does, you will keep it going. You or your father. Or both. It does not have to be either of you. But someone has to keep the seeds. Someone has to keep the field. I'll keep it, Grandma. All right, Tyler. I will remember you said that. He left the next morning. Eleanor stood on the porch and waved as Derek's car went down the dirt road. Tyler waved back through the rear window until the car was out of sight. Eleanor stood on the porch for a long time after they had gone. The June morning was warm and full of sound. Birds, bees in the clover, Jimmy hollerin' starting up the tiller in the backfield, Marlene's truck pulling up the drive. Life. So much life, where there had been, a year ago, nothing but brambles and silence and the slow decay of things that had been left for dead. Eleanor walked out to the field. She walked the rows of tomatoes, which were knee-high already, dark green and vigorous. She walked past the corn, which was waist-high and reaching. She walked past the melon patch, where Micah was kneeling next to a plant, because Micah came out every Saturday morning now to check on his melons, which he had started to name before they were even vines. She walked past the beans, climbing their poles, strong and steady. She walked to the far edge of the big field, where it ended at the stone wall her great-grandfather had built 140 years ago. She stopped at the wall. She put her hand on it. The stones were warm from the sun. She thought about her grandmother, about what her grandmother had known that Eleanor had taken 60 years to learn, that the seeds were not a gift. They were a trust. You did not keep them. You passed them on. That was what you did with seeds. You passed them on, and they fed the people who came after you, and those people passed them on, and so on, forever, or for as long as anyone was willing to do the work. Her grandmother had done the work for 60 years. Eleanor was going to do it for however many years she had left. And after her, Tyler, maybe. And after Tyler, someone else. The chain was long. It had been long before her, and it would be long after her. She was only one link. That was all she was. One link. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. She turned. She walked back up the field toward the house. Marlene was on the porch. Jimmy waved from the tractor. The children were coming up the drive. The day was starting. Eleanor Whitfield, 73 years old, walked back to her life, her second life, the life that had begun in a cardboard box on a kitchen table in Ohio and had become, against every expectation, a farm and a town and a future. She was home. She had come home. And the seeds her grandmother had given her were in the ground, and in the hands of her neighbors, and in the memory of her grandson, and they were going to outlast her, as all good seeds outlast the hand that plants them, as all good stories outlast the voice that tells them, as all good work outlasts the hands that do it. Her grandmother had known. All those years ago, she had known. Eleanor walked up the porch steps. Marlene handed her a cup of coffee. The sun came over the tree line and filled the field with light. "Good morning, partner," Marlene said. "Good morning." They drank their coffee. The work of the day lay ahead of them. It was summer again. The second summer. The seeds were in the ground. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.